Hamas is a Palestinian Islamic organization, with an associated military wing, the Izz ad-Din al-Qassam Brigades, in the Palestinian territories and elsewhere in the Middle East including Qatar. Hamas is designated as a terrorist organization by the European Union, Canada, Israel, Egypt, Japan, and the United States. Australia and the United Kingdom have designated the military wing of Hamas, the Izz ad-Din al-Qassam Brigades, as a terrorist organization. The organization is banned in Jordan. It is not regarded as a terrorist organization by Iran, Russia, Norway, Switzerland, Brazil, Turkey, China, and Qatar. Hamas was founded sometime in 1988, soon after the First Intifada broke out, as an offshoot of the Egyptian Muslim Brotherhood, which in its Gaza branch had been non-confrontational towards Israel, refrained from resistance, and was hostile to the PLO. Co-founder Sheikh Ahmed Jassan stated in 1987, and the Hamas Charter affirmed in 1988, that Hamas was founded to liberate Palestine, including modern-day Israel, from Israeli occupation and to establish an Islamic State in the area that is now Israel, the West Bank, and the Gaza Strip. The group has later stated that it may accept a 10-year truce if Israel withdraws to the 1967 borders and allows Palestinian refugees from 1948, as well as their descendants, to return to what is now Israel. The military wing of Hamas has launched attacks against Israeli soldiers and civilians. Tactics include suicide bombings, and since 2001, rocket attacks. Hamas's rocket arsenal, though mainly consisting of short-range homemade Qassam rockets, also includes long-range weapons that have reached major Israeli cities including Tel Aviv and Haifa. The attacks on civilians have been condemned as war crimes and crimes against humanity by human rights groups such as Human Rights Watch. In the January 2006 Palestinian parliamentary elections, Hamas won a decisive majority in the Palestinian parliament, defeating the PLO-affiliated Fatah party. Following the elections, the quartet made future foreign assistance to the PAR conditional upon the future government's commitment to non-violence, recognition of the State of Israel, and acceptance of previous agreements. Hamas rejected those changes, which led to the quartet suspending its foreign assistance program and Israel imposing economic sanctions on the Hamas-led administration. In March 2007, a national unity government headed by Prime Minister Ismail Haniyeh of Hamas was briefly formed, but this failed to restart international financial assistance. Tensions over control of Palestinian security forces soon erupted in the 2007 Battle of Gaza, after which Hamas took control of Gaza, while its officials were ousted from government positions in the West Bank. Israel and Egypt then imposed an economic blockade of the Gaza Strip, on the grounds that Fatah forces were no longer providing security there. In 2011, Hamas and Fatah announced a reconciliation agreement that provides for creation of a joint caretaker Palestinian government. Progress stalled, until an April 2014 agreement to form a compromise unity government, with elections to be held in late 2014. In 2006, Hamas used an underground cross-border tunnel to capture the Israeli soldier Gilad Shalit, holding him captive until 2011, when he was released in exchange for 1,027 Palestinian prisoners. Since then, Hamas has continued building a network of internal and cross-border tunnels, which are used to store and deploy weapons, shield militants, and facilitate cross-border attacks. Destroying the tunnels was a primary objective of Israeli forces in the 2014 Israel-Gaza conflict. Etymology: Hamas is an acronym of the Arabic phrase or Harakat al-Muqawama al-Islamiyya, meaning Islamic resistance movement. The Arabic word Hamas means enthusiasm or zeal. The Hamas Covenant interprets its name to mean strength and bravery. Leadership and structure. Hamas comprises three interrelated wings: the social welfare and political wings, which are responsible for the social, administrative, political, and propaganda activities of Hamas, and the military wing, which is engaged in covert activities, such as acting against suspected collaborators, gathering intelligence on potential targets, procuring weapons, and carrying out military attacks. Consultative councils. The Majlis al-Shura is the group's overarching political and decision-making body. It includes representatives from Gaza, the West Bank, Israeli prisons, and the exiled external leadership, the Political Bureau. Under this Shura Council are committees responsible for supervising Hamas activities, from media relations to military operations. In the West Bank and Gaza, local Shura committees answer to the Shura Council and carry out its decisions. Hamas's highest decision-making body is its Political Bureau, which consists of 15 members. Before the beginning of the Syrian civil war, it operated in exile in Damascus, Syria. The Bureau is elected by members who select their representatives in local consultative councils in specific geographic regions. The councils then nominate representatives to the General Consultative Council, and the Political Bureau is elected by members of the General Consultative Council. Military wing. The Izz ad-Din al-Qassam Brigades, Hamas's military wing formed in 1992, is named in commemoration of influential Palestinian nationalist Sheikh Izz ad-Din al-Qassam. Armed Hamas cells sometimes refer to themselves as students of Ayyash, students of the engineer, or Yahya Ayyash units, to commemorate Yahya Ayyash, an early Hamas bomb maker killed in 1996. Since its establishment, the military capability of Hamas has increased markedly, from rifles to Qassam rockets and more. While the number of members is known only to the brigade's leadership, Israel estimates the brigades have a core of several hundred members who receive military-style training, including training in Iran and in Syria. Additionally, the brigades have an estimated 10,000 operatives, of varying degrees of skill and professionalism, who are members of Hamas or their supporters and the internal security forces. These operatives can be expected to reinforce the brigades in an emergency situation. Although the Izz ad-Din al-Qassam brigades are an integral part of Hamas, they also operate independently of Hamas, and at times contrary to Hamas' stated aims. Most analysts agree that although differences of opinion between the Hamas military and political wing exist, Hamas's internal discipline is strong enough to contain him. Political scientists Ilana Kass and Bard O'Neill liken Hamas's relationship with the brigades to the political party Sinn Féin's relationship to the military arm of the Irish Republican Army. To further explain the relationship, they quote a senior Hamas official. The Izz ad-Din al-Qassam Brigade is a separate armed military wing, which has its own leaders who do not take their orders from Hamas, and do not tell us of their plans in advance. However, according to former U.S. Department of Treasury official and terrorism expert Matthew Levitt, the Hamas Political Bureau operates as the highest-ranking leadership body determining the policy of the Hamas organization and has responsibility for directing and coordinating terrorist acts. Hamas founder, Sheikh Ahmad Yassin, stated in 1998, "We cannot separate the wing from the body. If we do so, the body will not be able to fly." Hamas is one body. Social welfare. Hamas has a welfare wing providing social services to Palestinians in the Gaza Strip, including running relief programs and funding schools, orphanages, mosques, healthcare clinics, soup kitchens, and sports leagues. In particular, Hamas-funded health services where people could receive free or inexpensive medical treatment. Hamas greatly contributed to the health sector, and facilitated hospital and physician services in the Palestinian territory. On the other hand, Hamas's use of hospitals is sometimes criticized as purportedly serving the promotion of violence against Israel. Charities affiliated with Hamas are known to financially support families of those who have been killed or imprisoned while carrying out militant actions or supporting such actions. Families typically receive a one-time grant of $500 to $5,000. And those whose homes have been destroyed by the Israel Defense Forces have their rent paid for temporary housing. Families of militants not affiliated with Hamas sometimes receive less. Hamas has funded education and built Islamic charities, libraries, mosques and education centers for women. They also built nurseries, kindergartens, and supervised religious schools that provide free meals to children. When children attend their schools and mosques, parents are required to sign oaths of allegiance. Refugees, as well as those left without homes, are able to claim financial and technical assistance from Hamas. The work of Hamas in these fields supplements that provided by the United Nations Relief Works Agency. Despite building materials needing to be smuggled into the territory, luxury beach resorts and tourist facilities operated by the Interior Ministry have been constructed by Hamas government-linked charities, including gardens, playgrounds, football fields, a zoo and restaurants aimed to provide employment and low-cost entertainment for citizens. Some Palestinians have complained about the admission fee, criticizing Hamas for charging them to use government-owned property. Goals. Hamas' 1988 charter states that Hamas strives to raise the banner of valor over every inch of Palestine, and that Israel will exist and will continue to exist until Islam will obliterate it, just as it obliterated others before it. Article 31 of the charter states, under the wing of Islam, it is possible for the followers of the three religions, Islam, Christianity and Judaism, to coexist in peace and quiet with each other. After the elections in 2006, Hamas co-founder Mahmoud al-Zahar did not rule out the possibility of accepting a temporary two-state solution, and stated that he dreamed of hanging a huge map of the world on the wall at my Gaza home which does not show Israel on it. Xinhua reports that al-Zahar did not rule out the possibility of having Jews, Muslims and Christians living under the sovereignty of an Islamic State. In late 2006, Ismail Haniyeh, the political leader of Hamas, said that if a Palestinian state was formed within the 1967 lines, Hamas was willing to declare a truce that could last as long as 20 years. And stated that Hamas will never recognize the usurper Zionist government, and will continue jihad-like movement until the liberation of Jerusalem. In March 2006, Hamas released its official legislative program. The document clearly signaled that Hamas could refer the issue of recognizing Israel to a national referendum. Under the heading, Recognition of Israel, it stated simply, the question of recognizing Israel is not the jurisdiction of one faction, nor the government, but a decision for the Palestinian people. This was a major shift away from their 1988 charter. A few months later, via University of Maryland's Jerome Siegel, the group sent a letter to U.S. President George W. Bush stating they don't mind having a Palestinian state in the 1967 borders, and asked for direct negotiations. Siegel emphasized that a state within the 1967 borders and a truce for many years could be considered Hamas' de facto recognition of Israel. In an April 2008 meeting between Hamas leader Khaled Mashal and former U.S. President Jimmy Carter, an understanding was reached in which Hamas agreed it would respect the creation of a Palestinian state in the territory seized by Israel in the 1967 Six-Day War. provided this were ratified by the Palestinian people in a referendum. Hamas later publicly offered a long-term truce with Israel if Israel agreed to return to its 1967 borders and grant the right of return to all Palestinian refugees. In November 2008, Hamas leader Ismail Haniyeh restated that Hamas was willing to accept a Palestinian state within the 1967 borders, and offered Israel a long-term truce if Israel recognized the Palestinians' national rights. In 2009, in a letter to UN Secretary-General Ban Ki-moon, Haniyeh repeated his group's support for a two-state settlement based on 1967 borders. "We would never thwart efforts to create an independent Palestinian state with borders from June 4, 1967, with Jerusalem as its capital." On December 1, 2010, Ismail Haniyeh again repeated, "We accept a Palestinian state on the borders of 1967, with Jerusalem as its capital, the release of Palestinian prisoners, and the resolution of the issue of refugees, and Hamas will respect the results of a referendum, regardless of whether it differs with its ideology and principles." In February 2012, according to the Palestinian Authority, Hamas forswore the use of violence. Evidence for this was provided by an eruption of violence from Islamic Jihad in March 2012 after an Israeli assassination of a jihad leader, during which Hamas refrained from attacking Israel. Israel, despite its mantra that because Hamas is sovereign in Gaza it is responsible for what goes on there, almost seems to understand, wrote Israeli journalists Avi Issacharoff and Amos Hell, and has not bombed Hamas offices or installations. Israel has rejected some truce offers by Hamas because it contends the group uses them to prepare for more fighting rather than peace. Naima Abu-Sadr, a political scientist at Al-Azhar University, writes that Hamas talks of Hudna, temporary ceasefire, not of peace or reconciliation with Israel. They believe over time they will be strong enough to liberate all historic Palestine. Charter. The Hamas Charter, issued in 1988, outlined the organization's position on many issues at the time. It identifies Hamas as the Muslim Brotherhood in Palestine and declares its members to be Muslims who fear God and raise the banner of jihad in the face of the oppressors. The Charter states, "Our struggle against the Jews is very great and very serious, and calls for the eventual creation of an Islamic state in Palestine, in place of Israel and the Palestinian territories, and the obliteration or dissolution of Israel." The Charter also asserts that through shrewd manipulation of imperial countries and secret societies, Zionists were behind a wide range of events and disasters going as far back in history as the French Revolution. Among the Charter's controversial statements is the following: "The time will not come until Muslims will fight the Jews, and kill them, until the Jews hide behind rocks and trees, which will cry, 'O Muslim, there is a Jew hiding behind me. Come on and kill him.'" The document also quotes Islamic religious texts to provide justification for fighting against and killing the Jews of Israel, presenting the Arab-Israeli conflict as an inherently irreconcilable struggle between Jews and Muslims, and Judaism and Islam, adding that the only way to engage in this struggle between truth and falsehood is through Islam and by means of jihad, until victory or martyrdom. The Charter adds that, renouncing any part of Palestine means renouncing part of the religion of Islam. The Charter states that Hamas is humanistic and tolerant of other religions as long as they do not block Hamas's efforts. Current status of the Charter. Hamas leader Khaled Meshal indicated to Robert Pastor, senior advisor to the Carter Center, that the Charter is a piece of history and no longer relevant, but cannot be changed for internal reasons. Hamas does not use the Charter on their website and prefer to use their election manifesto to put forth their agenda. Pastor states that those who quote the Charter rather than more recent Hamas statements may be using the Charter as an excuse to ignore Hamas. British diplomat and former British ambassador to the United Nations Sir Jeremy Greenstock stated in early 2009 that the Hamas Charter was drawn up by a Hamas-linked imam some 20 years ago and has never been adopted since Hamas was elected as the Palestinian government in 2006. Mohammed Nimmer of American University comments on the charter: "It's attract men to mobilize support and it should be amended. It projects anger, not vision." Ahmed Yusuf, an advisor to Ismail Haniyeh, has questioned the use of the charter by Israel and its supporters to brand Hamas as a fundamentalist, terrorist, racist, anti-Semitic organization, and claims that they have taken parts of the charter out of context for propaganda purposes. In fact, the movement has to a certain degree moved on from content simply by participating in the political process, accepting a Palestinian state within the 1967 borders and publicly declaring a readiness to explore political solutions with the international community. While Hamas representatives recognize the problem, one official notes that Arafat got very little in return for changing the PLO charter under the Oslo Accords, and that there is agreement that little is gained from a non-violent approach. The two-state solution and Hamas Charter. Hamas has opposed the two-state solution as conceding the rest to Palestine in exchange for just the West Bank and Gaza. Hamas regards Palestine as an Islamic Waqf, consecrated for future Muslim generations, no part of which should be yielded. The Hamas 1988 charter states that the movement's aim is to raise the banner of valor over every inch of Palestine, for under the wing of Islam followers of all religions can coexist in security and safety where their lives, possessions and rights are concerned. To concede territory has been viewed by Hamas as equivalent to renouncing Islam itself. The charter also states that, when our enemies usurp some Islamic lands, jihad becomes a duty binding on all Muslims. This is frequently cited as proof that Hamas will not accept a two-state solution, and Israeli governments have refused to negotiate with Hamas on the ground that it does not acknowledge Israel's legitimacy, though Khaled Mashal, its leader, has publicly affirmed the movement's readiness to accept such a division. When Hamas won a majority in the 2006 Palestinian legislative election, Haniyeh, then president-elect, sent messages to both George Bush and Israel's leaders asking to be recognized and offering a long-term truce along the 1967 border lines. No response was forthcoming.